Welcome to the Twisting Paradigms in Real Life, the podcast where we explore the real life stories of leaders who are learning to lead stronger and change wiser. I'm your host, Kate McCaffrey, founder of Paradigm Twist. Welcome to Twisting Paradigms in Real Life. I'm really excited today to have Andrew Biernat here, who I've known for a few years now. And he has recently taken steps to create his own company and do some work in very similar ways in helping people just figure out how to be better in this crazy world. So, Andrew, I'm excited to have you here. So, for people who are listening or watching to know, we're doing this as a dual episode. So, you may, depending on whose episode you listen to, you'll get the same content for the most part. But, Andrew, it's so great to see you.
So great to see you. Thank you so much for teeing that up, Kate. And for those listening, yeah, Kate and I have known each other for a while. We especially got to get to know each other even more during a leadership training program based out of our community. So she was heading that up and running that, and I was one of the participants. Yeah, so we've got a great connection there, and I'm super excited because we see things very similarly. We tend to work with some different clientele, but yeah, we're seeing a lot of the same problems out in the workforce, a lot of the same issues. And I'm actually especially curious to hear some of the things that Kate does to solve some of these. And I'll be sharing some of the things that I do. And I think in some ways there may be some direct overlap, but I'm guessing too that there's going to be some really specific or unique things that we're each bringing as well. So for those listening, welcome to the show. Whether you're listening to Kate's episode or my episode, it's the same stuff. We're going to have a good time. Hardest part about a show like this is the co-hosting of it. So I think we're going to do a great job, though. We're super well connected. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to it.
Me too. Thanks so much, Andrew. I think one of the things we've talked about, and I hear often from people who are part of teams or are supervising teams, across industry. And I think, I work mostly in higher education these days and thinking about what's happening there. And one of the questions I often get asked, especially in a room where I'm doing a presentation at a conference, is how do I motivate my team when I know that they're feeling change fatigue, burnout, overwhelm, or lacking some motivation to do the actual work? And so I think what we're talking about today in your new book that you just published, which we'll certainly get to, talks a little bit about that. So I'd love to hear your insight there. How do you help people figure out how to motivate themselves and other people?
Yeah, and I think to dig into the core topic here, right? The paradigm twist is the idea of motivation is not something that you do to somebody. It is not an action that you impose on another person. And for those who have tried to do it, you have probably struggled very, very mightily to motivate. And you often hear the carrot or the stick, or right, the punishment or the reward. And ultimately, those are extremely simplistic ways of motivation. And we tend to get very simplistic results from that, and or short-term results from that, right? People will be motivated by the carrot until they get used to eating that carrot, and then it's not motivating anymore. They're motivated by the stick insofar as they're going to do the bare minimum to not have to deal with the stick, and then that's it, right? And so just within that typical structure of I'm imposing motivation on other people, it kind of breaks down in terms of how people are truly motivated. So there's been some great research out of the University at Rochester that's been digging into the core of human motivation. What is it that actually truly motivates people? And it's a global theory, and it's such a big theory that there's like 6 sub theories underneath it. Absolutely fascinating stuff. One of the core concepts in it I use in the way I teach people, I frame it as the performance enhancing vitamins. And these are the 3 essential nutrients that every single employee needs. This isn't like a nice to have, isn't like a maybe, when we start doing better financially, we'll start looking at this. These are employee needs. And if you are not addressing them, your employees are going to, number 1, suffer, number 2, withdraw, number 3, go find them elsewhere. Okay, that's typically the pattern that you'll see. And so the 3 vitamins are vitamin A, autonomy, vitamin B, belonging, and vitamin C, competence. And they need each of those 3 things from their work in order to feel motivated. And in order to engage with that, it's not I'm giving you your vitamins, right? I'm force feeding you these things. It's collaborative, right? They have to be a part of that process in order to actually have that work for them in terms of motivation.
Oh, that sounds great. I think the idea of vitamins, right? If we don't take them, we don't feel as good. And so, how can we create some of these analogies that you're doing is a good way to help people think about if we don't have these every day, we're not going to be able to perform in the best way that we can from a physical, mental standpoint. And I think right now, what I'm seeing too is people are just not really thinking about how people are doing. And certainly there's, a simple kind of thinking about, well, it's their responsibility to show up in a way that we need them to for the role that they're playing. But I also, I think the idea of how do we in some ways prescribe what people can do from taking these vitamins. Are there ways that you encourage people to think about taking them every day or incorporating them into their culture for their team?
Yeah. So one of the things I do is I have a very simple assessment that I have teams do. And ultimately, it'd be great if assessments like this or similar to it are baked into the culture, baked into what we do,
Oh, yeah.
instead of this like yearly review where I'm scrutinizing you and I'm evaluating you and
Mhm.
surprise, maybe telling you some things that you should have heard 8 months ago, right? Or holding you accountable for things that you've totally forgotten about. Instead of that type of management style, what I'm recommending and teaching people is having these regular check-ins that happen at the very minimum quarterly, where the team member is taking this assessment, and it's for them and it's for the
Mhm.
manager, right? So the
Mhm.
individual can see where their motivation levels are at, and that's I think an issue that a lot of companies run into is they gather data from their employees, but it's for management. It's for
Mhm.
leaders. It's not for everybody else. And so employees send this stuff off into the ether and sometimes they never hear about it again. And that's another disheartening piece of motivation that they have to experience. And so part of the assessment is they get the results right away. They get to see where they're at and they get some quick training on what can I personally do to find more motivation for myself
Mhm.
within this. They can start self-diagnosing because most people, I believe, they want to show up and they want to do their best work. And it's often the systems, the management, the red tape, everything else that gets in their way and prevents them from doing that. And that becomes a demotivating factor for them. So, yeah, by doing an assessment, now the employee sees it, the manager sees it. Now let's have a conversation about it. And it's not a I'm on one side of the table, you're on the other side of the table. It is let's be on the same side of the table and let's look at the assessment together and what are we seeing together. And now how can I as a manager help empower you to find more of your own motivation versus how can I make you motivated, right? So it's really
Mhm.
kind of flipping the way that you think about motivation in terms of motivating your team. And if you can do that, you will reap great rewards because people are going to find that actual intrinsic motivation for themselves.
And I do think, assessments, oftentimes people, when I suggest them, and you may have had this experience too, kind of roll their eyes and they're like, oh, not another
Another assessment.
personality test or
Right.
something that's going to tell me
Right.
something. And, I think sometimes too, when I work with clients who've done DISC or the change intelligence assessments that I'm part of, it's how do we incorporate this over the long term? So it's not just like you or me coming in and it's a one and done. I think sometimes too, it's like, well, this is data, right? It's data in a moment in time. So if someone were to take it 2 weeks later, it may be a little bit different when we have our own assessments. Cause I use one that's around sort of thinking about capacity for readiness and for readiness for change and living in these changing environments. And I think that's where we talk about the self assessment and then how do we talk about it as a group and where we're at before we do anything can be really beneficial. So I'm excited to hear that you're using an assessment as well, even if it's like a mini self assessment. It's still data, and you can't really argue with that. I mean, you
Exactly.
could.
You can. It's and when anytime someone's taking a self-assessment, there's gonna be baked in
Mhm.
bias to that. But that's also something you can talk about, right?
Right.
Is like
Yep.
often some certain types of people are harsher on themselves than other people are,
Mhm.
and other people maybe are a little bit more generous with themselves. And that some of
Mhm.
that is actually personality related. But at the same time, by having the manager and the employee both speak about it together, right? Turn this into a conversation like Kate was just talking about, whether it's with a team, whether it's a one-on-one. Ultimately, it is how are we addressing this? How are we, in a sense, kind of pulling the skeletons out of the closet? How are we pulling these conversations that we might tend to avoid? And how do we have
Mhm.
them in a collaborative way? And so, Kate, I'm kind of curious for you. We've been talking a lot about, assessments, but also, how do we address that motivational factor? What are some of the things that you're seeing works, and what are you doing to help in terms of helping managers find motivation for their employees?
I think part of it is thinking about the why behind what we do and really getting back to understanding that from a personal, professional space, as well as thinking about how do I then become present in the group that I'm in or with the leaders that I'm in. And so, I think part of it too is understanding where people are. So oftentimes I may do some type of mini assessment too when I'm beginning a coaching conversation with someone that's not necessarily a formal one. It's sort of to get them ready to do a more formal one, whether it's a 360 or something else that we're going to use to help identify their preferences around their behavior. And I find that that understanding opens doors to new self awareness, which I think is first in helping people really see, okay, what do I need to be doing differently for myself? But then how does that translate to other people? And how do I stabilize myself or anchor my own values, beliefs, mission, drive first before I can translate that to others? And I think that's where oftentimes, and you may see this too, I see where leadership isn't fully in it to win it. And so therefore the team is just phoning it in for whatever reason. And or there's a lack of clarity, right? There's a leader who may have a great vision and be able to say, here's what I want to see, here's what I want to have happen. But then they're not really good about figuring out, okay, what do we need to do every day to get there and to achieve that? And I think that's what I'm seeing most often is this lack of clarity, lack of consistency around the how and the what changing so much because people are leaving or organizations are shifting from a structure or even a merger. And so I think how do we navigate those types of changes in ways that can really understand where people are at first and then how does it translate to other people and how are we training them to really do this work is another piece that I think can be difficult because it takes time, it takes money, it takes energy. And so I think that's also often the first things to go is investing in the people.
100%. Yeah. Anytime there's a market downturn, learning and development professionals often see either getting a haircut and they're getting paid less, or a percentage of them are looking for jobs,
Right.
right? Because
Yeah.
it's seen as this, we can spare it for now. We'll circle back around when we're back in the good times, but when things are hard, let's not
Uh-huh.
do that. And I always look at, I gather a lot of business wisdom from a lot of different people, and Warren Buffett has a quote, something along the lines of, in terms of when other people are greedy, be cautious. When other people are
Mhm.
cautious, be greedy. And the sense
Mhm.
of that is the market is going to trend toward doing a certain thing. So at the time of our recording, the market is trending towards more layoffs, more kind of just pausing and waiting on things. And I believe that the organizations that are going to see great success 3 years from now are the ones that are making investments ahead of some of the things that are coming up for
Mhm.
them. Or instead of cutting staff, they're maybe retraining staff. Instead of hiring freeze, they're maybe hiring smart and kind of looking 2 years ahead. How can these
Mhm.
people be adding value for the organization? And so, um, I would encourage those that are listening to consider: are you doing this because your peers are doing it, or are you doing it because this is actually a business need? And have you vetted that out? Have you fully fleshed that out?
Mhm.
Because and it's tough, right? Because you're talking to two consultants
Mhm.
slash learning development professionals. We love training, we love teaching, we understand, and I've seen it in my career when you add that jet fuel of new thought, new ideas, that new spark, that new understanding, that new camaraderie, whatever it is that's been injected into that team through training or through these outside insights. It's like this catalyst, but it
Mhm.
often it often doesn't happen immediately. Right. It's not like,
Right.
cool, I brought in this person, we spent X amount of dollars, and then the next quarter we saw, a bajillion fold increase and it was amazing. It's usually a curve, right? It's usually this
Mhm.
upward
Mhm.
trend and it builds on itself and it accelerates. But Kate, I think you brought up, I think, probably the most important thought of this whole thing, and that is the idea of consistency. The thought that
Mhm.
cool, like for me as a consultant, whenever I go in and I'm working with a team, my goal is when I pull back from this, right? If I disappear, is this just going to be a little flash in the pan? And Andrew was
Right.
here, he did a song
Right.
and dance, and we were motivated for 2 months and it was great. Or have I left a lasting impact within the organization and they have new systems, new ways of doing things that they're going to stick with, that they're going to be consistent with, and that are actually going to make lasting change. And so I guess for you, Kate, in terms of that consistency conundrum, how do you help organizations with that?
Sure. I think that is one of the biggest challenges. And it always is, I always do some follow up later. And when I hear, well, we haven't really done anything with what we did with you because new leadership, new priorities, or X, Y, or Z crisis happened and we had to shift all of our resources towards that. And I think, again, I work mostly in higher education. And I think what's happening on campuses now is that they may be investing in people. And then what I often am working with them after the fact is, okay, so how do you incorporate this into what you're doing on a regular basis? Is it a once a month come together, have dessert and coffee, because that doesn't cost as much as lunch or breakfast, and talk about how are we implementing what we talked about on this particular training day? Or do we have a theme for this 6 months, 3 to 6 months that we're incorporating? So then everyone's focused on the same topic, I think can be very beneficial in helping people create that sustainability around the growth and the content. And I think that's the hardest part is time is our greatest resource. And if we're all busy, but how do we really be intentional if we're going to invest in something like you or me? How do we do that? And how do we create space for that? And, I think sometimes too, I'm encouraging people, like, if you are a leader who likes to have an open door policy, how do you create boundaries around that so you can have your own space and time to do your own work too and really think about that from an intentional standpoint? And maybe it's an open door policy 3 times a week for 40 minutes and that's it. Or it's an open coffee hour in a conference room where you're just there working from there, or people are dropping in, to be able to ask questions so that we're not disrupting that valuable resource of time, because I think that's where our energy gets sapped too is, I think it becomes the crisis of the day or the moment versus how are we being intentional about making sure we're incorporating the things that we're learning into what we're doing every day. How about you? What do you recommend for people to do in order to sustain what you do with them?
Yeah, so that's always the hardest part, right? Especially when you circle
Mhm.
back, like, hey, how are things going? We dropped
Mhm.
it, right? We just stopped doing it or whatever. Those are always the hardest to hear, especially when you've like worked with them, you train them up, you've shown them that this is what we got to do, and here's how you're going to sustain it. I've found, and this is from multiple previous job experiences. I used to work in sales. I used to work as a personal trainer for a while, and uh, one of the things within sales is you pre-sell certain ideas. You pre-sell against future objections. And you kind of, scaffold things in such a way so that when that future objection arises or that future challenge arises, you've already laid the groundwork so that we can really easily address that together. And when I was a personal trainer, I saw people trying to make life changes, right? And they're working on their habits, or they're trying to change in a sense who they are and in how they show up in the world. They're trying to move from, maybe not as fit to being more fit. And that takes behavior change. That takes consistency. It takes this new way of operating. And in order to do that, the thing that you're pre-selling against, or the thing that you're coaching against, is this idea that there will be hard times. You are going to want to stop. You are going to be extremely tempted to stop. That is a part of your journey. And there's a ton of great research out around habit building. And it's not
Mhm.
necessarily the easy days that build a habit. Because when it's easy, you just get up, you throw on your shoes, and off you go to the gym. It's when there's a blizzard and you didn't do the laundry and whatever else, right? There's a million things in your way stopping you from getting to the gym. It's on that one day, that singular day where everything seems to go wrong. That is the day that builds your habit. That is the day
Mhm.
that proves who you are. That is the day that decides what type of person you are. And so what I saw was the people in the fitness classes that I taught, the ones that showed up on the snow days, they showed up all the time. It didn't matter. It
Mhm.
was who they were. Whereas other people, they would they would say, you know what, I'm not going to go on a snow day, but they pre-decided that, right? They said, you know
Mhm.
what, for safety's sake, I'm not going to go on that snow day. And
Mhm.
they experienced just as good a results because they had already made the decision ahead of time versus waiting until that hard time came and then making the decision about it. And so when you do bring somebody in or when you are making a change within your organization, you need to decide ahead of time that when the hard times come, this is what we're going to do. Okay. And
Mhm.
it may be a slight restructure. It may be a slight change of something. And that's okay. But you've planned it ahead of time instead
Right.
of reacting to that change and usually derailing your behavior change or derailing your change initiative or whatever it is that you're working on. So, whatever it is, figure out ahead of time how you're going to operate and then follow that plan. Stick to that.
And what do you say to people when they say, "Well, here's where I get stuck," or "I can't do that for whatever reason," or, you know, "Kid is sick, mom is sick, I have to step in." What do you do and encourage people to do in that scenario when they come back with those types of
Sure.
reasons for not
Is
fulfilling their habit?
Yeah, and that's one of those things where it's gonna be a natural part of your life. So I have 4 children. They are delightful, but they are it's like this it's like a random machine. Like, I never know what's gonna go wrong, but I can't anticipate that there will be things that go wrong.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And so as part of that, and you alluded to some of this earlier, is kind of this capacity building, right? Is you need to build in space so that the inevitable disruption that comes isn't going to completely derail you.
Mhm.
And so if I'm trying to get into a fitness routine, as an easy example, right, I've got 4 kids. And so I need to be able to plan on what am I going to do when one of my kids is sick?
Mhm.
Instead of going to the gym, am I going to do a 5-minute at home routine? And instead of saying I'm going to do a 50-minute at home routine,
Mhm.
50 minutes, right? Or an hour long routine, I say I'm going to do a 5-minute routine because I know if I have to do an hour routine at home, I'm not going to do it. Right?
Right.
I'm
Right.
not gonna follow through. But if it's 5 minutes, okay, you know what? We
Mhm.
changed the plans because we had a disruption, and I know that I can still stay on track. I'm just gonna get this 5 minutes in, and I'm gonna keep moving forward. So I think what you're bringing up is often there will be objections, often there will be challenges. We know that there's going to be challenges. We know there will be disruptions. And how are we planning to respond to those? Have we built in enough
Mhm.
capacity that we're not completely thrown off of our project if someone goes out on maternity leave or something? How have we structured things so that we can move through this and still be okay?
Right, and how do we do it in the different time frames, right? I think for you to say, if I don't have 50 minutes, I'm going to do 5, and that's enough. And how do I just be okay with that and say, or what are we going to stop doing? Is one of the things I'm often talking with clients about. Is so you're going to try and do this, whatever this is, whether it's building a motivated team or implementing a strategic plan priority. What are you going to not do that you've always done while you're doing that in order to be able to make space and capacity for it? Because if you keep doing everything, nothing's going to be good,
It's
right? I
already
think
not
that's the
working,
challenge.
and so just adding more isn't going to fix it.
Isn't
Yeah.
gonna fix it, no. I think that's always been, and even, as a former administrator too, that was always one of my challenges was limits and boundaries and thinking about capacity, and, I was always the one who would be like, "Have great ideas, lots of good ideas, but how can we, be more logical and more realistic, I think, about what our capacity is, especially given the current sort of climate of things when it's people are just tapped out in so many ways."
So, on the capacity front, what are some recommendations you have? What are some of your typical things that you're advising teams on? How can you build that capacity? How can maintain elasticity to be able to respond to challenges?
Well, I think definitely seen some patterns in the work that I'm doing, and I'm working on sort of, working on publishing this idea too. It's around thinking about this idea of pause, right? How do we just take a beat and really kind of think about for ourselves, where are we? If we were to give ourselves a 1 to 5 scale of our energy level, are we low or high on any given day, on any given project? So we're thinking about, how do we measure our own motivation or willingness. And then it's really reflecting on what's going well. And then what do we need to capitalize on or strengthen first? And then where's the data? Are we assessing what we have to understand where we may be headed and why we're doing what we're doing. And I think data can really help us inform that, whether it's personal assessment data or actual real data from surveys or, market research or whatever data might be important for us to pay attention to. And then it's really thinking about from that analysis, then what do we want to do? What are some small things we can start to do in the next 14 to 21 days? And then again, repeat the cycle, pause, reflect, analyze, support. What do we need to know? And then how do we really implement in a way that can be both sustainable, but then manageable too from a process standpoint? So I've been really thinking about that a lot and seeing some consistencies in the conversation, even though the words might be different.
I love that. And you look at that idea of a pause. It's so difficult as an individual to actually
Mm-hmm.
hit the pause button, especially in crisis or especially in hard times. And sometimes it feels like organizations kind of, continually manufacture
Mm-hmm.
constant crises so that it's like there's always a
Mm-hmm.
crisis. Like we're always
Mm-hmm.
in panic mode. Everything is urgent. And when you're in that spot, it's so difficult to just punch pause. Like I'm literally just going to take 2 hours today and just figure out what's going on. You know what I mean? Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to figure out my
Right.
workflow.
Right.
But how many people do
Yeah.
that? They just hop from one
Right.
email to the next. They're responding to one thing to the next, right? I got this other deadline. I got this, right? And it's not stopping to say, like, what's actually important,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like when I get to my year end review, like which of these things actually made a difference for
Mm-hmm.
the company? Which of these were busy work? Which of these were other people's priorities that could have been handled possibly by somebody else? And I think that ability to pause is number one, a great individual skill. And I think
Mm-hmm.
those that can do it see significant dividends. And you look at calm under pressure, right? So
Mm-hmm.
much of that is that ability to take that pause and
Mm-hmm.
notice for a minute what is happening. Because you look at first responders, right? Is there's so much data when they get somewhere, right? Maybe there's a fire, a car accident, there's an injury, right? There's so much going on. They need
Mm-hmm.
to assess. And some of that's experience, right? You come in with your
Mm-hmm.
experience and your gut feel and instinct, but lacking that gut feel of exactly what to do next, take that second and then go
Mm-hmm.
through what is our top priorities, what is most important, right? What is our organization listed as our big rocks for this year? And are the things that I'm currently working on aligned
Mm-hmm.
with those big rock initiatives, right? Am I bringing those things further forward? Because if I can't justify that, if I can't connect that, I'm putting myself in trouble. But then I'm also putting the organization at a disadvantage as well,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
my workflow is not focused on those core initiatives.
Agreed. And I think taking that time to both pause and reflect. And I think, the crisis response analogy, I mean, we're in it and all the time. And, I think when I was an administrator, someone called me a crisis junkie. And at first I was like, "Ooh, I don't like that." And then I really thought about it. I was like, oh, they're right. Because once you get into that mode, our brains stay wired that way. And it's really hard to get out of it from a neuroplasticity, neuroscience standpoint. I won't go into all of the brain stuff, but I think I've learned a lot about that in the last few years and understand it much better than I did when I was an administrator trying to lead through crisis and through changes in ways that weren't really going well. And that's why I do what I do now, is because I knew that there were better ways to do this, either as a middle manager, understanding what the top wants and how do I integrate it into what the bottom of the organization, if we're thinking in traditional hierarchy, and thinking about how do I do that in a way that really fits who I am and my values. I think sometimes those get lost when we're in crisis mode too. It's because we're just doing, doing, doing and have to react. And then our brains just become wired that way, almost like we're waiting for the other shoe to drop every time something comes up or someone pokes their head in our door. And that's no way to be. It's not sustainable. It's not good for us from a health or mental health standpoint. And so I appreciate that you brought up the idea of this crisis response and how do we get out of this reaction mode. And sometimes we have to, right? Some of us are in roles where we have to react, but knowing what that is and having the systems to help us support moving out of it when we're done can be really valuable. So I'd love to hear more about your book. Let's maybe shift gears a little
Sure.
bit here. Tell me, just released and recently,
Yep.
so I'd love to hear about the process, why you have it, where people can access it, and what you hope it will bring to the world.
100%. Yeah. So it's called The Team That Loves Mondays: How to Build a Culture of Energy, Engagement, and Extraordinary Results. And the core of the book started when I had my first job. So this is many, many moons ago. First roll out of college, I was not aligned with the organization. Wasn't a huge fan of the company, what we were doing, and I struggled. I struggled mightily in that role, even though great
Mhm.
pay, great benefits, decent culture. But overall, there was a lot there that a certain individual may have loved. I couldn't find myself loving it, and I just
Mhm.
struggled, and that stuck with me because I wanted to know why. Like, why is it that I couldn't get that role figured out? And I've always experienced these ups and downs in my workflow over the course of a year or 2 years or 3 years, where sometimes I'm just really engaged, really fired up, really excited, and other times I'm just punching the clock and I can't wait to go home and do something else. And I consider myself a highly motivated person. And so for me, in my mind, a highly motivated person to be experiencing this, what's it like for people that maybe aren't as highly motivated in any
Mhm.
given moment? And so, I had to start researching myself, understanding human behavior. What is it that's going on within me that's causing this? But it's also reaching outside of that. Is okay. What is the research that's going on out there? What is this data that's
Yes.
out there? How are people responding in these type of situations? And so it's pulling kind of all of that experience and insight together into one book. And the intention behind it, right? The team that loves Mondays. Number one, I believe it's easier to get a team to love Mondays than it is to get an individual to love Mondays,
Mhm.
because there is so much of your work that is dependent on those around you. And if those around you aren't with you in this plan, they're not bought into those ideas, it's that they will immediately become your number one obstacle and roadblock to experiencing more of that joy and purpose at work. And the goal of the book ultimately is to teach individuals how you yourself can
Mhm.
self motivate. How can you self diagnose? How can you take some of these steps to find out what's lacking for you when it comes to motivation? So I've had to do a lot of that personal work to figure some of that out.
Mhm.
And the other side of that is, how can leaders, people that are in management, people that are executives, people that own their companies, they sometimes feel isolated, or they feel like we're trying to push things forward and nobody's on board with this, or we're doing all the right things, we're doing what people are asking, but they're still not motivated. Like, what's going on there? And they're feeling that
Mhm.
disconnect. And some of that is the nature of work is shifting and changing a little bit.
Sure.
And it's helping these leaders to understand this is what your team is needing and this is what they're looking for, and ultimately, it's that common language. Now, the employees are speaking the same language that management is, and now they can
Mhm.
actually understand each other. Because when it comes to our human needs, these aren't just nice to have little perks at work. That would be, oh, it'd be cool if you could trust me a little bit more to do my assignments, right? No, like, that's a human need to experience
Mhm.
that level of trust and to be given the keys to be able to handle that level of responsibility. And to deny that is to deny a human need. And when you do that, there are consequences. Certainly you could do that. But to do that may mean that person starts to withdraw. They start to feel
Right.
like they're micromanaged. They start to maybe
Mhm.
put their resume out there a little bit, right? There's these consequences of these actions that start to happen, and they're very natural consequences once you understand that these aren't just perks. These aren't just nice to have. These are needs that they have. And when you can meet these needs, which often require no financial investment,
Right.
right? Like, I don't need to invest $10,000 to trust you more. I just need to,
Right.
as a manager, work on myself a little bit to trust this person or train this
Right.
person or get this person what they need so I can trust them to do these things, right? And that's just one element of many
Mm.
that people may be experiencing. So really the goal of the book is that people have this common language.
Mhm.
They have this ability to work together better. They come in, they enjoy their work, and ultimately we're more productive. We get more done, we're more satisfied, and our jobs aren't this drudgery that we have to get through. They're this thing that we get to do that impacts and changes the world.
That's great. I'm so excited to hear about this, and I can't wait to read a copy. Where can people get it? Is it accessible online at this point? I'm not sure where you are
Amazon.
at in the
Amazon's the
stages.
easiest spot to find
Okay,
it.
great.
Yep.
Yes, gotta love that. Perfect. Perfect. So I want to move into just sort of thinking about as we close up here some pop paradigm questions that I like to ask sometimes. And thinking about the topic that we've had today, what's the one thing that you do on Mondays to keep yourself motivated if you were to pick something?
Yeah, so I think the one thing I do on Mondays is, going back to what we said earlier, is typically something that I don't do, is I don't schedule anything for the first half of Mondays typically, and
Mhm.
sometimes even the whole Monday, right? At most, I'll take maybe a call or two. And so Mondays are usually blank, and I put blockers on my Mondays because I need to figure out what's going on this week. What are my top priorities? It's my deep work time. right? How can I actually get ahead on something? A lot of the work that I do is extremely creative. And so by going in stressed and trying to be, on a Thursday is my creative time, right? In the middle of the chaotic week, like I find that doesn't tend to work for me as well. I tend to just go to whatever is hot, whatever seems to be the current priority or the current fire. And so by making Mondays a little bit slower, I'm able to, number one, ease into the week. Number two, I'm not late for morning meetings on Mondays because I forgot about it over the weekend, right? And I'm better positioned to have a successful week. So it's
Uh-huh.
often what I don't do on Mondays, which is have a densely packed schedule. How about you?
I love that. And there's certainly a luxury in that, I think, as well. I just did a post and an article around the idea of the Sunday scaries, right? And thinking about
Yeah.
and I always had them. And sometimes I worked all weekend too, giving the role that I had. And I think, how do we just take that time? And while I had the permission to do that when I was in a full-time role in an organization, I wouldn't do it because I didn't feel like I could. And so I think as managers, and now that I'm my own manager, I'm in control of that, which is, again, I also see that there's a privilege there. And how do we do that across the board, right? What's to say that we can't, not have meetings until 1 o'clock on a Monday so everyone can have the morning to be able to refocus on the priorities, do their reflection and thinking about the week and really kind of planning for how are we going to be intentional about these things. And I love that you're doing that now. And I think I didn't learn that early on in my business. And so I'm glad to hear that you have incorporated that because now I incorporate that and I'm much better for the rest of the week. And even if I don't get to everything that I had planned to do on Monday, I still feel okay about it.
Exactly.
Too,
Exactly.
too. Yeah. So the other thing we talk a lot about are these phrases that we all kind of have. And what would be one that you would suggest organizations or leaders retire permanently if you were to recommend something?
Oh man. So one that I retired with my clients when I was a personal trainer is the phrase "I can't."
Mm-hmm.
And because it's automatically a limiting phrase. It automatically means that it's impossible to do, even if it is very possible, even if it's actually kind of easy and probably would be beneficial. And so this idea that I can't, it takes your power away. You
Mm-hmm.
lose that ability to decide and to make choices, right? Your locus of control is shifted. And so just modifying little pieces of language like that are difficult in the long term, but you immediately start to see short-term changes because yeah, I can't do this, or I'm choosing not to do it because if I did do that, this is probably what would happen, right? Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
choosing, I can't shovel my driveway because my back hurts. No, no, no. You can shovel your driveway, but there would be a consequence for that, right?
Right.
Like your back
Yes.
would flare up, right? You'd probably be, less productive the rest of your week, like, right? You could do that, right? That is a very, very real possibility to you, but you've assessed that the consequences of doing that are less than ideal. And so let's call it what it is. You can do it, but we're choosing not to do it. And sometimes that's wisdom. That's a smart thing to do is to not do certain
Mm-hmm.
things or
Mm-hmm.
to do certain things. So I would say I can't is a phrase that I would try to banish.
That's a good one. I like that one a lot. Mine would be I'm busy,
Yeah,
which I think, I certainly have used throughout my career. And I think it diminishes our ability to think more intentionally about the what we're doing and the how. And if I ask someone, "How are you doing?" and they say, "I'm really busy," it sort of cuts out the conversation. It's not a feeling, first of all, so you can't really say that that's how you are. And I think it also just puts us in this bucket of, okay, I need to leave this person alone or I need to avoid them. I think it creates potentially an emotional reaction that we don't intentionally do this, I think, because everyone's busy.
yeah,
There's no doubt about that. No matter what, we're all busy. And so how do we reframe to be able to be more intentional about what we're saying, even if we're feeling that way? And how do we help ourselves out of that feeling?
huge.
So
I
that
love
would
that.
be mine.
That's a good
That would
one.
be mine. All right, one final one about, my company name is Paradigm Twist and kind of thinking about this idea that we don't need to do 25 things. And I think your 3 vitamins a day certainly are within the realm of that kind of philosophy and belief. What's the one paradigm twist that you would encourage people to think about
Yeah, I'd
based on the work
probably
that you do?
yeah, based on our conversation today is change the way you think about motivation. It's not something that you do to somebody. It is something that is intrinsic to all of us and you can do with somebody. And that's the way you need to change the way you operate. Okay. Instead of trying to motivate people, try to work with people to help them find their motivation and work with them to get them more motivated. How about
Yeah,
you?
and mine would be along the same lines. It's around this idea of impacting greater, right? How do we find ways to be able to lead stronger, be able to do change better or wiser? And then how are we impacting in the ways that we want that can have a greater impact for both ourselves and the people around us would be what I would say is probably the predominant twist. I know that was probably three, but I think I think they're not necessarily small things, but really thinking about it in that way can help frame what we're trying to do more intentionally.
I love that.
Great. Well, thanks for spending time here. It was great to catch up with you and hear about your latest venture in publishing this book. I can't wait to get it and see it, and I hope that others will as well. And I think we'll both have on our episodes just show notes where people can get access to information about us and if they want to connect and resources that we might have. Like I have a coaching corner library that I like to give people is just sort of here are some, 12 twists you can do for yourself or your team that can help you have that impact that you're looking for in different ways. So we'll share that link at the end of our episode here that people can access.
Perfect.
Thanks so
Okay.
much for
Yeah.
spending the time. Here's
Thank you.
to people being more motivated on Mondays.
Cheers to that. Cheers to that, Kate. Thanks for a great
All
conversation.
right. Thanks so much, Andrew. Take care. What a fun conversation that was. I hope you felt the energy of Andrew and the work that he's doing. I hope that you'll go try and find his book about how to make the team that loves Mondays. I love his formula of the performance enhancing vitamins that he has made into an analogy for how to create motivation. It's often one of the most common questions I get these days is, how do we motivate our team and how do we motivate our employees? And it's hard even sometimes when we're not motivated ourselves. So having a guide like this could be really beneficial as you think about adding small twists to be able to have the shifts that you want and thinking about how do we create more motivated teams and how do we think about the context of motivation in different ways. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for listening to Twisting Paradigms in Real Life. If something sparked a shift in your thinking, I'd love for you to share it or leave a review to help others find the show. You can also explore more at twistyourparadigm.com or join me on LinkedIn. And remember, change doesn't happen in the abstract. It happens in real life. One conversation, one choice, one paradigm twist at a time. See you next time.